My daughter told me to stop calling her, so I did, but not the way she thought. In the next few minutes, you'll discover why some silences don't heal. They ignite. I raised her. I gave her everything, my sweat in Chicago's kitchens, my dreams in every pot of gumbo. Then I found out what she did with our savings, the ones meant for my granddaughter. They thought I'd stay quiet, that a 60-year-old woman like me would just fade away. They were wrong. Thank you for being here. Have you ever poured your heart into someone only to be called a burden? Leave a comment below, even just one word. Where are you watching from? Or what time is it right now? If stories of resilience, of women reclaiming their fire, speak to you, don't forget to subscribe for more. This is my story, and it's not what you expect. I stood in my Chicago kitchen, the air thick with the warm, buttery scent of cornbread cooling on the counter. Aisha's text still burned in my mind, her words cutting deeper than any knife I'd wielded as a chef. Mom, don't call anymore. I need space. At 60, I thought I'd felt every kind of hurt, but this was new, raw, like a burn that hadn't blistered yet. I set the phone down on the scarred wooden table, my fingers lingering on its edges, as if holding it might soften what I'd read. The kitchen was quiet, save for the faint tick of the clock above the stove. It was the same clock that had counted out the hours I spent teaching Aisha to knead dough, her tiny hands sticky with flour, her laugh filling this room like music. I raised her alone, pouring my sweat into Creole dishes at a downtown restaurant, my nights spent scrubbing pots so she could have a college degree, a life I never dared dream for myself. And now she called me a burden. The word echoed in my head, heavy like a stone dropped into still water. I walked to the sink, my reflection caught in the window above it. The woman staring back had lines etched deeper than I remembered, her eyes carrying a question I couldn't voice. Am I really invisible now? I'd always feared this moment, the one where the world, my own daughter, decided I was no longer needed. My hands, still strong from years of chopping onions and stirring roux, trembled slightly as I gripped the counter. Was it anger, grief, or something older, something every woman my age carries, the dread of fading away? I turned away, my gaze landing on the cornbread, its golden crust cracked just so, the way Aisha used to love. I could still see her at 6, perched on a stool calling me kitchen queen as she sneaked a bite before it cooled. That girl was gone, replaced by a 32-year-old woman who hadn't visited in months, not even for Nia's birthday. I tried to call her after the text, just to hear her voice, to ask what I'd done wrong. The line didn't ring, just a cold, automated message. This number is not accepting calls. Blocked. My own daughter had blocked me. The air felt heavier now, like the kitchen was holding its breath. I sat at the table, the chair creaking under me, and opened my banking app, more out of habit than suspicion. The joint savings account for Naya, my 12-year-old granddaughter, was one I'd started years ago, every penny scraped from tips and overtime. I expected to see the balance I'd checked last month, $15,200. Instead, it read $12,200, $3,000 gone. My heart thudded, a dull, insistent beat. A glitch, maybe? But the transaction history was no glitch. A withdrawal dated 2 days ago, sent to something called Bright Future LLC. I'd never heard of it. I leaned back, my thumb tracing the edge of the phone case, a cheap plastic thing Nia had picked out at a dollar store. Who's behind this? Aisha had access to the account, but we'd agreed it was for Nia's future. College, maybe a car when she turned 16. Had Aisha taken it? The thought felt like a betrayal sharper than her text. I wanted to call her again to demand answers, but the block on her number stopped me cold. My chest tightened, not with tears, not yet, but with a question. What's she hiding? I stood and walked to the fridge, pulling out a pitcher of sweet tea, the glass sweating in my hand. The cold burned my palm, grounding me. I poured a glass, watching the amber liquid swirl, and thought about the last time Aisha was here. She'd been distracted, her eyes darting to her phone every few minutes, her husband Marcus's name lighting up the screen. Marcus, with his slick smile and tailored suits, always seemed too polished, like he was selling something. I'd never trusted him, but Aisha loved him, so I kept quiet. Had I been too quiet? The tea sat untouched as I pulled out my journal, an old leather-bound book I kept next to the spice rack. I flipped to a blank page, my pen scratching out the date, October 15th. Below it I wrote, Aisha told me to stop calling. The savings are short, $3,000. Something's wrong. My handwriting, usually neat from years of writing recipes, wobbled slightly, betraying the steadiness I wanted to feel. I paused, staring at the words, then added, I'm not invisible, not yet. I closed the journal, my eyes catching the knife block on the counter. One slot was empty. Aisha's favorite paring knife, the one she'd used to carve apples into little stars for Nia. She'd borrowed it last Christmas, promising to bring it back. She never did. A small thing, but it gnawed at me. Another piece of us missing. I wondered if she'd forgotten or if she'd meant to keep it like she was keeping her distance now. The clock ticked louder, or maybe it was just my pulse. I didn't cry. Instead, I felt something shift inside me, like a spark catching in dry kindling. Aisha thought I'd stay silent, that I'd let this slide like I'd let so many things slide. Her missed calls, her rushed visits, her excuses, but I wasn't that woman anymore. I'd spent 60 years building a life, a family, a legacy. I wasn't about to let it slip away without a fight. I picked up the phone again, not to call Aisha, but to call the bank. The line rang, and I straightened, my voice steady as I said, I need to speak to someone about my account, now. The morning light filtered through the kitchen curtains, casting soft shadows on the linoleum floor, but it did nothing to warm the chill in my bones. Aisha's text still lingered in my mind like a bad aftertaste. Her words, don't call anymore, looping endlessly. I sat at the table, my hands wrapped around a chipped mug, the coffee inside long gone cold. I'd spent the night tossing, replaying every moment I might have missed, every sign that my daughter had slipped so far away. How did we get here? I pushed the mug aside and reached for my recipe book, its leather cover worn soft from years of use. Flipping it open, I found Aisha's childish scrawl on the first page. Mama, kitchen queen! Written in crayon, the letters uneven but proud. I traced the words with my fingertip, the memory sharp. Her at 6, standing on a chair stirring gumbo with a wooden spoon too big for her hands. She'd giggle when the roux bubbled, her eyes wide with wonder. That girl felt like a stranger now, replaced by someone who hadn't called in months, not even for Nia's birthday. The ache in my chest grew heavier, not just for Aisha, but for the fear that I was fading from her world. At 60, I'd seen enough to know how women like me could become ghosts in their own families, our voices drowned out by time. I closed the book, my gaze drifting to the fridge, where a photo of Nia was pinned under a magnet shaped like a crab. Her smile, so like Aisha's, made my throat tighten. Was she okay? I hadn't seen her since summer, her silence reminding me of her college days, when she dodged my questions about late nights and quick cash. I grabbed my phone, the screen still showing the banking app from last night. That $3,000 withdrawal to Bright Future LLC gnawed at me, a splinter I couldn't ignore. I opened the app again, scrolling through the transaction history with a chef's precision, looking for patterns. There it was, another transfer, one I 1500, dated yesterday to the same company. My pulse quickened, my fingers tightening around the phone. Aisha had access to the account, but we'd sworn it was for Naya's future, her college, her dreams. Why would she touch it without telling me? I stood pacing the small kitchen, the floor creaking under my slippers. The stove clock ticked, each second a reminder of the silence Aisha had imposed. I thought of Marcus, her husband, always too smooth, his smile like polished chrome, pretty but cold. Last Christmas, he'd barely looked up from his phone during dinner, his fingers tapping out texts while Aisha cleared plates. I'd caught her glancing at him, her shoulders hunched like she was waiting for permission to speak. Had he always been like that, or had I missed the signs? I stopped by the counter, my eyes landing on the spice rack, where a jar of cayenne sat slightly askew. Aisha used to sneak extra into the gumbo, grinning when I pretended to scold her. That memory felt like a lifeline, but it also sharpened the question, what changed her? I wanted to believe it was stress, maybe money troubles, but the missing funds pointed to something darker. I opened the banking app again, staring at the company name, Bright Future LLC. It sounded like one of those slick ads you skip on TV promising wealth with no substance. The phone buzzed, snapping me out of my thoughts. A text from my neighbor, Miss Evelyn, inviting me to community potluck tonight. I typed a quick, maybe, but the idea of facing her pitying smile, where's your daughter, Ronke, made my stomach turn. At the last potluck, she'd asked about Aisha, her voice soft, like I was fragile. I wasn't. But standing there, surrounded by families, I'd felt like a shadow. My place in the world shrinking. Am I just the woman who used to matter? I shook off the thought and picked up a wooden spoon from the counter, its handle worn from years of stirring. I twirled it, my mind racing with suspicions. Aisha's hiding something, or someone's hiding it for her. My pen hesitated, the ink bleeding slightly as I pressed too hard. I added, I'm not fading yet. I'll find the truth. The words looked defiant on the page, but my hand shook, betraying the fear beneath. I stood, needing to move, and walked to the living room, where a photo of Aisha and Nia sat on the mantel. Aisha's arm was around her daughter, but her smile didn't reach her eyes, like she was posing for someone else's camera. I picked up the frame, noticing a smudge on the glass, as if someone had touched it and walked away. When did I stop seeing her? I set it down, my fingers brushing the edge, and felt a spark of resolve. The doorbell rang, sharp and unexpected. My heart jumped, half hoping it was Aisha, but it was just the mailman, leaving a flyer for the potluck. I glanced at it, then tossed it aside, my mind still on the bank account. I needed answers, not casseroles. I sat back at the table, opened my laptop, and typed Bright Future LLC into the search bar. The results were vague, a bare-bones website with stock photos and no real address. My gut twisted. This isn't right. I closed the laptop, my coffee still untouched, and felt that spark grow hotter. Aisha might want me silent, but I'd spent too many years fighting to be heard. I wasn't stopping now. The morning was gray, the kind of Chicago gloom that seeps into your bones. I sat at my kitchen table, the recipe book closed, its memories too heavy to touch today. Aisha's silence and the missing money, $4,500 gone now, sat like undigested food in my gut. I couldn't shake the image of her name tied to those withdrawals, but my heart refused to believe she'd betray Nia's future on her own. What's pulling her strings? I needed answers, not guesses. I picked up my phone and scrolled through my contacts, stopping at James, a private investigator who used to come to my restaurant, always ordering the gumbo with extra okra. His voice was gruff but warm when he answered. Ronke, what's up? You don't call unless it's serious. I told him about the savings account, the strange company, Bright Future LLC, and Aisha's text cutting me off. His pause was heavy, like he knew this wasn't just about money. I'll dig into it, he said. Give me a few days. I hung up, my fingers tapping the table. Restless. Could I wait that long? I opened my journal, its pages already filling with my suspicions. I wrote, October 17th, hired James to track the money. Aisha's not herself. Who's behind this? My pen moved with the precision I used to measure spices, each word a step toward clarity. But as I wrote, my mind wandered to Nia, my granddaughter, only 12, with Aisha's eyes but a quieter soul. I hadn't seen her in months, and the thought of her caught in whatever this was made my chest ache. Is she safe? I needed to know. I grabbed my keys and drove to Nia's school, a brick building with faded murals on the walls. The bell rang as I parked, kids spilling out, their laughter sharp against the overcast sky. Nia emerged, her backpack slung low, her face drawn, not the bright girl I remembered. I called her name, and she ran to me, her hug tight but brief, like she was afraid to linger. Grandma, what are you doing here? Her voice was soft, her eyes darting to the ground, avoiding mine. We sat on a bench outside the school, the cold metal biting through my coat. I asked about her mom, keeping my tone light, but Nia's fingers twisted the strap of her backpack, a nervous tick I hadn't seen before. Mom's been weird, she said, barely above a whisper. She and Dad fight a lot. He told her not to call you anymore. My breath caught. Marcus. His name landed like a stone in my stomach. I'd always sensed his control over Aisha, the way he'd interrupt her stories or check her phone during dinner. Was he the one pulling her away? I touched Nia's hand, her skin cool despite the warmth of her jacket. You okay, baby? I asked. She nodded, but her eyes said otherwise, a flicker of fear or maybe sadness. Mom cries sometimes when she thinks I'm asleep, she said, then stopped like she'd said too much. I wanted to press, but her hunched shoulders told me to wait. Instead, I handed her a candy from my purse, a peppermint she used to love. She took it, her fingers brushing mine, but didn't unwrap it. That small rejection stung, like another thread between us fraying. Driving home, my mind churned. Nia's words, he told her not to call you, looped in my head, each repetition tightening the knot in my chest. Marcus wasn't just a slick talker. He was orchestrating something, maybe more than the money. I gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles whitening, and caught my reflection in the rearview mirror. The woman looking back wasn't the Ronke who'd let things slide, who'd smiled through Aisha's rushed visits. I'm not that woman anymore. Back in the kitchen, I stood by the stove, tracing the edge of a pot, its weight grounding my racing thoughts. Nia's scared, and Marcus told Aisha to cut me off. This isn't just about the savings. The words stared back, stark and undeniable. I flipped to an earlier page where I'd jotted down the withdrawal dates, noticing they aligned with Aisha's last visit. She'd been jittery then, her phone buzzing constantly, Marcus's name flashing. I hadn't thought much of it at the time, but now it felt like a clue, a breadcrumb I'd overlooked. I stood needing to move and walked to the window. The street outside was quiet, save for a neighbor raking leaves, the scrape of metal on pavement oddly soothing. I thought of the community potluck I'd skipped last night, Miss Evelyn's text still unanswered. Facing her questions about Aisha would have been too much, her pity reminding me how alone I felt without my daughter's calls. Am I just a voice she ignores now? The thought stung, but it also lit something inside me, a resolve to fight for my place, for Naya, for answers. I sat back down, my coffee mug still cold from this morning. I opened my laptop, hesitating before typing Bright Future LLC again. The website hadn't changed. Generic, no contact info, just a smiling stock photo of a woman in a headset. It screamed scam. I clicked away, my fingers hovering over the keys, then typed Marcus's name instead. Nothing concrete came up, just a LinkedIn profile with a headshot that didn't match the man I knew. Too clean, too perfect. Who are you, Marcus? The phone buzzed, a text from James. Found something on the company. Call me tomorrow. My heart skipped, but I didn't call back yet. I needed to sit with this to let the pieces settle. I wrote one last line in my journal. Something's wrong, and it's bigger than I thought. I closed the book, my hand steady now, the spark in my chest growing hotter. Aisha might want me to be silent, but I was done staying quiet. James's call came at dawn, his voice low and urgent, like he was delivering bad news to a hospital room. Ronke, it's Marcos. He's behind Bright Future LLC, forging your signature to siphon the savings. My kitchen felt smaller, the walls closing in as I gripped the phone, the cold plastic biting into my palm. Forgery. Marcus, with his slick suits and sharper smiles, had always seemed like trouble, but this was a gut punch. How could Aisha let this happen? I sat at the table, my coffee untouched, the steam curling like a ghost. The journal lay open, my last entry. Nia's whispered fear of her parents' fights, staring back. James had emailed me scanned documents, withdrawal forms with my name scrawled in a hand that wasn't mine. The R was too sharp, the K slanted wrong, a clumsy mimicry of my careful script. I traced the signature with my finger, my heart pounding. He thought I wouldn't notice. The betrayal wasn't just the money, it was the violation of my name, my trust. I remembered Marcus at Thanksgiving, his eyes flicking to Aisha's phone, his hand resting on her wrist like a leash. She'd barely spoken, her laughter forced, her gaze darting to him for approval. I'd chalked it up to stress, maybe a rough patch in their marriage, but now it felt like a script I'd missed. Was she protecting him or trapped by him? I needed to know, not just for the money, but for her, for Naya, for the family I'd fought to build. I drove to a cafe downtown, a neutral spot, and texted Aisha to meet me. My hands shook as I typed, not from fear, but from a fire building inside, the kind that had carried me through years as a single mom. The cafe smelled of burnt espresso and cinnamon, the hum of conversation a dull roar. Aisha arrived, her coat too thin for the chill, her eyes red-rimmed, like she hadn't slept. She sat across from me, her fingers twisting a napkin into knots, a nervous habit she'd had since childhood. "What's this about, Mom?" Her voice was sharp and defensive, but it cracked on the last word. I slid the printed withdrawal forms across the table, the forged signatures glaring under the cafe's dim lights. "Explain this," I said, my voice steady despite the storm in my chest. Aisha's eyes widened, her breath catching, but she didn't touch the papers. "I don't know anything about that," she said too fast, her gaze flicking to the door like she wanted to bolt. "Aisha, don't lie to me. Not now." She leaned back, her hands trembling, and whispered, "I had no choice, Mom." Then she stood, the chair scraping loudly enough to turn heads, and ran out, leaving the papers behind. I sat frozen, the napkin she'd twisted still on the table, frayed at the edges. No choice? The words echoed, heavy with questions. Was she scared, controlled? I wanted to chase her, to shake the truth out, but my legs wouldn't move. Instead, I stared at the papers, the fake signature mocking me. A waiter passed, his tray clattering, and I caught his glance. Pity or maybe just curiosity. Do I look like someone who's given up? I folded the papers, my fingers deliberate, and tucked them into my purse. Back home, I called the bank, my voice cutting through the static of doubt. The teller, a young guy with a bored tone, hesitated when I mentioned the account. Ma'am, are you sure you didn't authorize those transfers? Sometimes folks forget. His words stung, a reminder of how people see women my age. Forgetful, irrelevant. I snapped. I don't forget. Lock the account now. He mumbled an apology, and after a few clicks, he confirmed, It's locked. No one can touch it without your approval. I hung up, my pulse slowing, but the victory felt hollow. What's Aisha hiding? I opened my journal, the pen heavier than usual. I wrote, October 20th, Marcus forged my name. Aisha ran from the truth. Account's locked, but something's still wrong. My handwriting, usually sharp from years of jotting recipes, wavered, mirroring the uncertainty in my gut. I thought of Nia's sad eyes at school, her quiet confession about her parents' fights. Marcus's control was clearer now, but Aisha's role wasn't. Was she complicit, or was she a puppet too? I stood and walked to the stove, where a pot of leftover gumbo sat, its lid slightly ajar, the way Aisha used to leave it when she'd sneak a taste. I lifted the lid, the rich scent of shrimp and spices hitting me a fleeting comfort, but it also brought back her rushed visits, how she'd barely eat, her phone always buzzing with Marcus's name. I'd ignored those signs, thinking she was just busy. How much did I miss? I set the lid down, the clang louder than I meant, and felt the fire in me flare. The phone vibrated, a text from Miss Evelyn about another community event. I ignored it, my mind too full of Aisha's trembling voice, her quick exit. I sat back at the table, staring at the journal, the forged documents beside it, the cafe scene replayed, her twisted napkin, her whispered no choice. It wasn't just guilt, it was fear. I wrote one more line. Aisha's scared and it's bigger than the money. I closed the journal, my hand steady now, the spark inside me burning brighter. Marcus thought I'd stay quiet, that a 60-year-old woman would fade into the background. He was wrong. I wasn't just fighting for the savings. I was fighting for my daughter. The rain battered my Chicago rooftop, a relentless drumbeat that matched the storm in my chest. Aisha's whispered. I had no choice from the cafe haunted me. Her fear as tangible as the forged signatures Marcus had scrawled in my name. I sat in the dark, the kitchen lit only by the faint glow of my phone, its screen a lifeline to whatever truth lay beyond my reach. What's holding her prisoner? The locked savings account was a start, but it wasn't enough. Not for Aisha, not for Nia. My phone buzzed, a notification from Nia, my 12-year-old granddaughter, popping up at 10 p.m. Too late for a school night. Grandma, check your messages. It's important. My heart lurched, a mix of dread and hope. I opened the app, finding a voice recording labeled Dad's Call. I hesitated, my thumb hovering, the rain outside louder now, like it was urging me to press play. What did you find, baby? I hit the button, and Marcus's voice filled the room, low and smug mid-conversation. The transfers are clean. She won't notice. If Aisha talks, I'll tell everyone about her gambling debts. I froze, the phone slipping slightly in my grip. Gambling debts? Aisha. The words hit like a slap, but the next ones burned deeper. If Ronke pushes, we say she's confused. Old ladies forget things, no one will question it. A woman's voice, someone I didn't know, laughed sharp and cold. She's 60, it's believable. The recording cut off, static crackling like my thoughts. I played it again, then a third time, each word carving a new wound. They're planning to erase me, but worse, Aisha wasn't the betrayer. She was trapped, her past weaponized against her. I stood, my bare feet cold on the linoleum, and paced to the window. The rain blurred the street lights, turning them into smudged stars. Aisha, my fierce girl who once burned her tongue sneaking gumbo, had a secret I'd never known. Gambling? When? I remembered her college years, late nights she'd brushed off as studying, her quick excuses for borrowed cash. I'd trusted her, never pushed. Did I miss her cries for help? The thought twisted in me, guilt mixing with anger at Marcus, who'd turned her shame into a leash. I sat back down, the phone still warm in my hand. Nia's text blinked. I heard Dad on the phone. I'm scared for Mom. My granddaughter, so young, had risked this for her mother. I typed back, You're brave, baby. I've got this. But my hands shook, the weight of her trust pressing against the fear in my chest. How do I save them both? I thought of my own past, escaping a man who thought he owned me before Aisha was born. I'd clawed my way out. Aisha could too, but she needed me to light the way. I sat at the counter, gripping a jar of cayenne, its heat a reminder of my own fire. Nia sent a recording. Marcus is laundering money, using Aisha's past to control her. She's not the enemy. My pen dug into the paper, the ink smudging as my resolve hardened. I added, I'll protect them. I thought of Nia's nervous tick at school, twisting her backpack strap, and Aisha's trembling hands at the cafe. They weren't just clues, they were cries for help I'd almost missed. I needed a plan, someone who could turn this recording into action. I called Carla, a lawyer I'd met years ago at the restaurant, her no-nonsense voice cutting through my fog. Ronke, send me that recording, she said after I explained. If Marcus is laundering money, we can nail him for fraud. Aisha's involvement complicates things, but we can file for a protective order and start divorce proceedings. I nodded, though she couldn't see, my mind racing. It'll take time, Carla warned. Courts move slowly and Marcus might fight back. Let him try, I thought, my jaw tight. I stood, the rain still pounding, and walked to the counter, where a jar of okra sat, unopened since Aisha's last visit. Its label was peeling, a small thing, but it reminded me of her rushed departures, always glancing at Marcus's texts. I'd ignored those signs, thinking love blinded her. Now I saw control, not love. How long has he been breaking her? I opened my laptop, saved the recording as truth, and emailed it to Carla, my fingers steady despite the storm inside. The house creaked, the rain a steady hum against the windows. I thought of the community potluck I'd dodged, the pity in Miss Evelyn's eyes when she'd asked about Aisha. I'd felt small then, a woman shrinking into her own life, but now, with Nia's recording, I felt stronger. Like the Ronke who'd built a career from nothing, who'd raised a daughter alone, I was ready to fight, not just for Nia, but for me. I sat back at the table, my journal open, the pen ready. I wrote, Marcus thinks he can bury me. He's wrong. I'm pulling Aisha out. The words felt like a vow, each letter a spark in the dark. I thought of Aisha's face at the cafe, her eyes pleading behind her fear. She wasn't gone. She was lost. I closed the journal, my hand no longer trembling. The rain slowed, a quiet settling over the house, but inside me, a fire burned. Marcus thought he'd silenced us both. He didn't know I was just getting started. The kitchen was dark, save for the soft glow of a single bulb above the stove, casting long shadows across the counter. Aisha's trembling whisper from the cafe. I had no choice, and Nia's recording of Marcus's scheming voice looped in my mind, a bitter recipe I couldn't unmix. I'd spent the night wrestling with the truth. My daughter wasn't the villain, but a captive in her own life. How do I pull her free? At 60, I'd fought battles before, but this one felt different, heavier, like lifting a pot too full to carry alone. I invited Aisha to the house, texting her to come alone, my fingers hesitating over each word. The rain had stopped, leaving a damp chill that seeped through the windows. I set out 2 mugs, their handles chipped from years of use, and brewed coffee, its bitter aroma grounding me. When the doorbell rang, my heart stuttered. Aisha stood there, her coat soaked, her eyes hollow, like she'd been running from more than just the weather. She sat at the table, her hands clasped tight, knuckles pale. I didn't waste time. Aisha, listen to this, I said, playing Nia's recording. Marcus's voice spilled out, cold and calculated, admitting to laundering money and threatening her with her past gambling debts. Her face crumpled, tears spilling as she hugged herself, her shoulders shaking. He said he'd take Nia if I didn't sign, she choked out, her voice barely a whisper. How long has she carried this? The question burned, but I pushed it aside, focusing on her trembling hands, the way they gripped the mug without lifting it. I reached across the table, my hand hovering over hers, unsure if touch would break her more. I've been where you are, I said, my voice steady despite the ache in my chest. Before you were born, I left a man who thought he owned me. You're stronger than you know, Aisha. We'll get you out. Her eyes met mine, wide with fear but flickering with something else. Hope, maybe. Can I give her what I found back then? I thought of my own escape, the nights I'd cried alone, building a life for us. She nodded, slow, like she was testing the weight of her own resolve. We drove to Carla's office, a small space downtown cluttered with legal books and coffee cups. Carla, sharp in a blazer, listened as I explained the recording, Aisha's silence, and Marcus's fraud. "We can file for a protective order and start divorce proceedings," she said, her pen tapping the desk, a rhythm that felt like a countdown. "The fraud case is strong, but transferring the savings account to Nia will hit snags. Marcus might contest it, and courts take time, months maybe." I glanced at Aisha, her gaze fixed on the floor, her fingers tapping nervously on her knee. "She's still scared." I nodded at Carla. "Do it, whatever it takes." Back home, I called the bank again, confirming the account was still locked. The teller, a woman this time, sounded sympathetic but firm. "Marcus tried to access it this morning. We blocked him, but he was pushy. You'll need court orders to transfer it fully to your granddaughter." My jaw tightened. He's not giving up. I thanked her, my voice calm, but inside I felt a fire spreading, the kind that had fueled me through years of scrubbing pots to raise Aisha. I sat at the kitchen table, the mug still there, one untouched. Aisha had left quietly, promising to call tomorrow, but her silence lingered, heavy as the damp air. I opened my journal, its pages worn from my nightly confessions. I wrote, October 25th. Aisha's trapped, but she's fighting. Marcus tried the account. It's Nia's now. My pen paused, the ink pooling slightly. I added, I'm her shield. The words felt like a vow, but my mind churned with doubt. What if he fights dirtier? I thought of Nia's nervous tick, her whispered fears, and Aisha's trembling hands. They were counting on me. I stood, needing to move, and walked to the sink. A single spoon lay there, its handle bent from years of stirring gumbo. Aisha used to tease me for keeping it, saying it was junk. Now it felt like a relic of the girl I needed to save. I picked it up, the metal cool against my palm, and saw my reflection in its curve, tired but fierce. I've fought harder battles. I set it down, the clink sharp in the quiet, and felt my resolve harden. Carla's warning about legal delays replayed in my head. Months could mean Marcus tightening his grip, maybe hurting Aisha or Nia. I thought of the community potluck I'd skipped, the way neighbors' questions made me feel small. But I wasn't small now. I was Ronke, the woman who'd built a life from nothing, who'd walked away from a man like Marcus once before. He thinks I'm just an old lady. I sat back down, staring at the journal, the spoon, the untouched mugs. Aisha's fear was real, but so was my fire. I wrote one last line. He's not winning this. I closed the journal, my hand steady, the kitchen quiet, except for the hum of the fridge. The fight was just beginning, and I was ready. The afternoon sun slanted through my kitchen window, glinting off the cast iron skillet on the stove, its black surface worn smooth by years of my hands. Aisha's tearful confession and Nia's brave recording had shifted something in me, turning my anger into purpose. But when a letter from Marcus arrived, slipped under my door like a coward's threat, warning me to back off or face consequences, my blood boiled. Does he think I'll fold? At 60, I'd faced worse than his words, and I wasn't about to let him scare me silent. I held the letter over the skillet, striking a match with a flick of my wrist. The flame caught fast, licking the paper's edges, turning his threats to ash. The acrid smell filled the kitchen, sharp and cleansing, like a ritual to banish his shadow. I watched the embers curl, my heart steady, and thought, this is what fear burns like. The skillet, my mother's before it was mine, felt like an ally, its weight a reminder of the strength I'd carried through decades of struggle. I needed to rebuild, not just for me, but for Aisha and Nia. I called Nia over, telling her to bring her mom. They arrived that evening, Aisha's eyes still puffy, Nia clutching a notebook with a shy smile. I set out ingredients for gumbo, shrimp, okra, tomatoes, their colors vivid against the counter. We're cooking tonight, I said, tying an apron around my waist. Aisha hesitated, her fingers clutching the hem of her apron. A nervous gesture I hadn't seen since her teens. Is she ready to come back? I handed Nia a wooden spoon, guiding her to stir the roux, her small hands careful but eager. Aisha watched, her shoulders loosening, and then, slowly, she joined us, chopping onions with a precision I'd taught her years ago. A gospel tune hummed softly from the radio, blending with the sizzle of the pan and the sharp tang of spices, pulling us together in a way words couldn't. Nia giggled when a shrimp slipped from her fingers, and Aisha's laugh, soft, real, caught me off guard. When did I last hear that? For a moment, the kitchen felt whole again. like it had when Aisha was a girl, not a woman, under Marcus's thumb. But as we cooked, my mind drifted to the legal fight ahead. Carla had warned of delays in Marcus's attempts to contest the account transfer. I glanced at Aisha, her knife moving rhythmically, and wondered if she could hold strong. Can I carry her through this? I'd been her shield once, working double shifts to keep her fed and safe. Now I needed to be more. A lighthouse guiding her out of his storm. The thought was heavy, but the warmth of the kitchen, the clatter of our spoons gave me strength. Later, alone, I sat with my coffee, the mug's handle rough under my thumb. I'd spent years blaming myself for Aisha's distance, thinking my love wasn't enough to keep her close. Was I too hard on her? The question stung, but the gumbo's lingering scent reminded me of tonight, of her laugh, of Nia's smile. I wasn't just fighting Marcus, I was fighting for us, for the family we could still be. I opened my journal, its pages a map of my resolve, and wrote, October 28th, burned Marcus's letter. Cooked with Aisha and Nia. I'm not just saving money, I'm saving us. The idea came then, sudden and clear, like a recipe I'd forgotten. I'd spent too long in this kitchen alone, my fire dimmed by Aisha's silence. What if I shared it? I grabbed a flyer from the community center, its edges crumpled, and sketched a plan. A free cooking class for women like me, older, overlooked, their stories buried under years of caring for others. What if we cooked together? I imagined their hands stirring pots, their voices filling the silence I'd feared. The thought lit something in me, a spark brighter than the match I'd struck. I stood walking to the stove, where the skillet still sat, its surface dusted with ash. That afternoon, I'd stopped by the community center, facing Miss Evelyn's questions with a nod, feeling the first stirrings of courage to step back into that world. The community center wasn't far, a short walk from my house. I'd been avoiding it, dreading the pity in neighbors' eyes, but now I saw a chance to reclaim my place. I'm not invisible. I taped the flyer to the fridge next to Nia's photo and wrote, Cooking class, next week for women who've been forgotten. We'll remember together. The phone buzzed, a text from Carla. Marcus submitted an initial counterclaim on the account. It's a weak move, but we're ready. My stomach twisted, but I didn't flinch. Marcus's threats were ash now, his control slipping. I thought of Aisha's laugh tonight, fragile but real, and Nia's careful stirring, her notebook clutched like a treasure. They were my why, my fire. I wrote one last line in my journal. He thinks he can scare me. He doesn't know my kitchen. I closed the book, the skillet gleaming under the light, and felt the weight of my own strength. The fight wasn't over, but I was ready to burn brighter. The community center smelled of old wood and fresh coffee, its fluorescent lights humming softly overhead. My cooking class had started small, just a handful of women, but now the room buzzed with laughter and the clatter of pots, a chorus that drowned out the silence I'd feared for so long. At 60, I'd turned my kitchen into a haven, not just for Aisha and Nia, but for women like me, whose stories had been shelved like forgotten recipes. Am I really building something new? The thought warmed me, even as Marcus's counterclaim on the savings account loomed, a shadow I refused to let dim my fire. I stood at the front, showing Miss Lorraine, a 65-year-old widow, how to whisk roux without burning it. Her hands shook, not from age, but from nerves, her eyes carrying the same weight I'd seen in my own mirror, fear of being invisible. I haven't cooked for anyone since my husband passed, she said, her voice low like a confession. I nodded, touching her arm. You're cooking for you now, I said, and her smile, tentative but real, felt like a victory. Are we all finding our way back? The class was a tapestry of stories. Miss Evelyn shared how her son stopped calling after moving west. Another woman, Clara, admitted she felt useless since her kids left home. Their words echoed my own pain, the years I'd spent wondering if I'd failed Aisha. I stirred the gumbo, the steam rising in soft curls, and thought, we're not just making food, we're making ourselves seen. The room felt alive, the chatter a shield against the loneliness that had once clung to me like damp air. Aisha came to class that evening, her first time since our night cooking together. She stood at the back, hesitant, her fingers twisting a dish towel, a nervous habit I knew too well. I handed her a knife to chop celery, and she worked quietly, her movements steady but guarded. You're doing well, I said, and she met my eyes, a flicker of her old spark there. She'd signed the divorce papers that morning, Carla had told me, and started a job at a local grocery, her first step toward freedom. Is she finding her fire too? I'd written an article for the community paper, From Kitchen to Heart, pouring out my journey, Aisha's silence, Marcus's betrayal, the class that gave me purpose. It was published yesterday, tucked between ads for bake sales and obituaries. I hadn't expected much, but that morning, a letter arrived, handwritten, from a woman named Ruth, 68, who'd read it. Your words made me feel seen, she wrote. My daughter hasn't called in years. I'm not alone anymore. I clutched the letter, my throat tight, and slipped it into my journal. Did I start something bigger than me? The class ended with plates of gumbo shared around folding tables, the women's laughter louder than the clink of spoons. I watched Aisha take a bite, her eyes closing briefly, like she was tasting home. She stayed to help clean, stacking dishes with care, her shoulders no longer hunched. I'm proud of you, I said, and she paused, the dish towel still in her hands, her lips parting like she wanted to say more but couldn't. Does she see me now? The moment passed, but it left a warmth in me, like the afterglow of a good meal. Back home, I sat at my kitchen table, the letter from Ruth beside my journal. I opened it, rereading her words, and felt a shift, like a weight lifted. I'd spent so long fearing I was fading, a woman whose only role was mother, grandmother, chef. But this class, these women, this article, they were proof I was more. I wrote, November 5th, the class is growing. Aisha's fighting. My words reached Ruth. My pen hovered, then added, I'm not invisible. The ink settled, steady as my heartbeat, no longer wavering. I stood walking to the fridge where Naya's photo hung, her smile bright under the crab magnet. I thought of her notebook, clutched during our cooking night, her giggles filling the kitchen. I'd given her a space to be a kid again, not just a witness to her parents' fights. Aisha, too, was finding her way, her job a small but real step. Am I enough for them? The question lingered, but it didn't cut like before. The class had shown me I was enough for others, for myself. The phone buzzed, a text from Carla. Court date set for next month. Marcus is pushing back hard. My stomach tightened, but I didn't flinch. His counterclaim was a hurdle, not a wall. I pictured Miss Lorraine's shaky hands steadying over the roux, Aisha's careful knife work, and Ruth's letter. They were my strength now, not just Aisha and Nia. I wrote one last line. He can fight. I'm not backing down. I closed the journal, the kitchen quiet but alive, the scent of gumbo lingering like a promise. The fire in me wasn't just for my family. It was for every woman who'd felt forgotten. I was burning bright, and I wasn't done. The community center glowed under string lights, the tables covered with checkered cloths and steaming dishes, jambalaya, cornbread, pecan pie, each one a story from my cooking class. The room buzzed with chatter, the air thick with spices and laughter, a warmth I hadn't felt in years. At 60, I'd turned my pain into this, a feast where women like me, once invisible, stood tall. Have I finally found my place? The thought settled in me, soft but sure, as I watched the crowd, my heart full, yet tethered to the fight still simmering with Marcus. I moved through the room, my apron dusted with flour, greeting the women from class. Miss Lorraine carried her gumbo pot with pride, her once shaky hands steady now. Clara, whose kids hadn't called in years, laughed over a slice of pie, her eyes bright. I'd given them more than recipes. I'd given them a mirror to see their own strength. Did I do the same for myself? I caught my reflection in a glass door, the lines on my face not just scars of loss, but proof of battles won. Aisha arrived late, her hair loose, a smile breaking through her usual guarded look. She carried a tray of biscuits, her first solo dish for the class, and set it down with a shy nod. These look perfect, I said, and her eyes met mine softer than they'd been in months. She'd been at her grocery job for weeks now, her divorce papers filed, her steps toward freedom clearer each day. Is she finally home? Nia trailed behind, clutching a rolled-up poster, her grin wide but nervous, like she was hiding a secret. The crowd quieted as Nia stepped to the center, unrolling her poster. A painting of my kitchen, the stove aglow, with Grandma Fire scrawled in bold red. She read a poem, her voice steady. Grandma Fire burning bright, cooking love through every night. The room erupted in claps, some wiping tears, and I laughed through my own, my throat tight. When did she grow so brave? Nia ran to me, hugging tight, her poster crinkling against my side. Aisha joined us, her hand on my shoulder, and whispered, I'm sorry, Mom, for everything. Her voice cracked, and I squeezed her hand, no words needed. I handed Nia a new recipe book, its cover plain but sturdy like my skillet. Inside I'd written, "Keep the fire, let no one dim it." She traced the words, her fingers careful like she was holding something sacred. I looked at Aisha, her biscuits half gone on the table, and saw the girl who'd once called me kitchen queen, now a woman finding her own spark. Did I give her enough? The question lingered, but her nod, small but certain, was answer enough. Later, alone in my kitchen, I sat with my journal, the feast's warmth still in my bones. The letter from Ruth, the woman who'd read my article, lay beside it, her words a reminder that my voice had reached beyond these walls. I wrote, November 10th, the feast was ours. Aisha's back. Nia's my fire. My pen paused, the ink steady now, no longer smudging. I added, I'm seen. The words felt final, a full stop to the fear I'd carried, of fading, of being forgotten. I stood walking to the sink where a single plate sat, its edge chipped from years of use. I washed it slowly, the soap suds catching the light, and thought of the class, the women who'd shared their stories of loss and resilience. They'd given me as much as I'd given them, a place to belong. Am I enough? For years I'd asked that, thinking Aisha's silence meant I'd failed. Now I saw it differently. I'd been enough all along, not just for her, but for me. Carla had texted earlier. Marcus's counterclaim is weakening. Court's leaning our way. I didn't smile, but I didn't flinch either. His fight was a flicker compared to the fire I'd built here, with Aisha, Nia, and these women. I thought of Nia's painting, now taped to my fridge, its bold colors a testament to her love. I wrote one last line. He can't dim this light. I closed the journal, my hand steady, the kitchen quiet but alive, its walls holding every laugh from tonight. I looked out the window, the Chicago night clear, stars faint but there. I wasn't waiting for Aisha's calls anymore, or for Marcus's threats to fade. I was Ronke, the woman who'd cooked through pain, who'd turned silence into a feast. My fire wasn't just for my family, it was for every woman who'd felt unseen, for every heart that needed a spark. I whispered to the empty room, I'm not done burning, and smiled knowing it was true. This journey taught me that silence can be a trap, a heavy weight that keeps you small until you choose to break it. I fought not just for the money Marcus stole, but for Aisha's freedom, for Nia's future, and for my own place in a world that sometimes forgets women like me. My kitchen became more than a place to cook. It became a sanctuary where I rebuilt my family and lifted others, where every pot of gumbo carried a story of resilience. I am Ronke, 60 years old, and I've learned that my worth isn't measured by who calls me back or who tries to dim my light. It's in the fire I keep burning, the strength I share with every woman who feels unseen. True love isn't about clinging to the past. It's about giving yourself and those you cherish the courage to rise, to stand tall, and to shine without apology. That's my story, and I'm so grateful you've stayed with me through every moment of it. If it touched you, please hit that like button. It helps spread this fire. Subscribe to the channel for more stories of women reclaiming their strength, finding their voices, and building something beautiful from pain. I'd love to hear from you. What's a time you stood up for yourself when the world expected you to stay quiet? Drop a comment below, even just a word. It means more than you know. There's so much more to come. Stories of heart, grit, and hope that I can't wait to share. Thank you for being here, for listening, for being part of this journey. I'll see you in the next one, with more stories to light the way.